Here we are again. Today is Thursday, September 14th, and as you know, we've been covering the previews for the sales at Christie's for Asia Week that's coming up in just another week or so. And I mentioned the other day that we'll be talking also about the Sotheby sales because they've got a number of good sales coming in as well. And so it makes going to New York sort of a nice package deal these days. One of the sales is this: Vestiges of Ancient China, and there's a number of very, very interesting lots in here. This is a fairly small sale. What is it? It has something like 60 lots, and is as it appears early Chinese works of art dating up, sort of finishing out at around the Tang Dynasty. There's a lot of Han work in here, Western Zhao and so forth. Some very nice jades, but there's a couple of lots that hopped out at me for different reasons, and I'm going to talk about them, and then we're going to get into the big auction, which is the important Chinese works of art, or fine Chinese works of art. One of the pieces is this. This I thought was absolutely wonderful. It's a Sui Dynasty figure of a foreigner. It's about 14 and a half inches tall. It is in wonderful condition, very expressive, beautifully potted. Absolutely beautifully potted all the way down, very long. It's sort of attenuated body. The everything appears to be intact and so forth. And the good part of it is that the provenance goes back to C.T. Liu. This was something C.T. Liu handled, and then as they say, his successor, Frank Caro, who started out as C.T. Liu's photographer and became very interested in the subject and did well with it. C.T. Liu retired from the Asian art business basically in about 1949 when Mao Zedong came in, because he thought that was the end of the business. He thought there wouldn't be any more business out of China, because C.T. Liu's main business was bringing stuff out of China. He was a little bit controversial about some of that, because people today are saying, well, he sort of looted the place and bribed people and got things out. And then other people say, well, if he hadn't done that, it might have all been, wrecked during the revolution. So there's always an ongoing debate about C.T. Liu. But a lot of the things that he did bring out of China are today in many well-known museums and institutions and major private collections all over the world. And but this figure was something that he had handled. It doesn't surprise me at all. It's the kind of stuff that he absolutely loved. It's a wonderful piece of pottery, and it's estimated at $10,000 to $15,000. And then over to this Tang Dynasty exceedingly rare mythical beast ornament plaque, a little bronze piece. And what caught my eye about this was, one, I think it's absolutely wonderfully done, beautifully cast, lots of details. Love the clawed front, the paws and the rear paws, the way the tail is flying in the air. But the interesting part of this is it had belonged to Archibald Brankston. And those of you who've been collecting for any length of time probably know who Archibald Brankston was. He ended up being the sort of the keeper of ceramics at the British Museum. He died very, very young. He was a genius. He died at the age of 30 or 31. He was raised in Shanghai. His father was an engineer over there, and he became fascinated with Chinese art and culture. He began doing research as a teenager, and he just accumulated an incredible amount of knowledge. And during his time, before he died, a few years before he died, he wrote this book, and if any of you have it, you know how good the book is. And it's early Ming wares of Qing Chen. In the original edition that was published in 1937 or 38, they only printed about 600 copies, and he died in 1941. He died very young, as I said, 30 years old. And then this was a reprint that was done of the book about 50. It was done 50 odd years ago, 1974. They may have reprinted it in 1970. They may have reprinted it since, I don't know. But it's a good book. It's worth reading. And he was a scholar on Chinese Ming ceramics in particular, but he was very interested in early Chinese architecture, early Chinese ornaments and so forth. And he had an unbelievable memory. And then he went to Britain, and he worked with Hobson, and he became the keeper of ceramics and all that sort of thing at the British Museum. And then after that, so many of you will be familiar with this. He did the famous, here it is, the International Exhibition at the Royal Academy in 1935 and 1936, probably the greatest exhibition ever done of Chinese works of art that's ever been mounted in one place at one time. Perhaps, well, maybe if you go to the Palace Museum, you see something similar. But the Chinese government shipped over container loads of some of their finest pieces, and then pieces were pulled in from private collections all over Britain. And part of it was because of Brankston's reputation and love of China and love of Chinese art, and that had a lot to do with it. And he wrote that book I just mentioned the year or so after the exhibition finished. He probably was working on it before, and so forth. But you never see his things come up for auction anywhere. He had a significant collection because during his life he donated most of it, especially toward the end because he knew he was very ill, and his father donated the rest of his collection in his memory. When he lost his son, and it was a very fitting tribute. And so you don't see things that belong to Brankston turn up in the market. And you have this wonderful plaque. It's 5 or 6 inches long. What is it? It's 6 and 1/8 inches long, estimated at $5,000 to $7,000. But is a fascinating keepsake from that period, and with interesting provenance and all that. It's certainly worth considering. And the only 2 names under provenance is A.W. Brankston, of course, and then the Ralph M. Chait Galleries, last sold in 1979. So this has been off the market for, as you know, do the math, 45 years, half a century hasn't been available. All right, and then over to this, a pair of Fangzhou Gui bronzes from the Western Zhao period. These are very, very rare, and these are inscribed. And they're inscribed to a woman who had them made, and there's a good write-up on it. And this particular form of bronze was devised and invented during the Western Zhao period, where they began putting them on these raised platforms for ritualistic purposes. And she had a pair of them made, the woman that had these, and they're inscribed with her name. And the fact that these were made for a woman, she must have been of incredible importance or from an unbelievably important family, because this was a major commission. It was something only reserved for the most influential members of the society at the time. And you ended up with these 2 beautiful examples. They're estimated at $800 to $1.2 million, but they are absolutely beautiful. The surface on them is great. The quality of the castings obviously is spectacular. They provided a bunch of photographs with them. You can go through and look at them. Good pictures of the interiors and so forth. And there's the writing, the inscription in the bottom, and they talk about. There's an essay at the bottom that explains who she was and a great deal of detail, more than I can go through here. It's down here. There's a long write-up, extensive write-up in both Chinese and in English. So if you speak Chinese, you go down and read it as well. All right, now the next thing that came along was this very, very interesting rare brown Senkai glazed horse. Tang Dynasty, 22 inches tall, really, really nice looking figure. But I looked at it, and the color caught my eye. It's sort of a brownish, almost in places it almost looks a little like aubergine, but it is a brown glaze. And it's got this beautiful, very typical, beautiful green saddle and this speckled Senkai decoration making up the blanket on the back of the horse. It's beautifully done and beautifully articulated. The way the hoofs are done, the glaze running down over the unglazed part of the pottery on his hoofs. Great looking face, nice head, beautiful ears, so forth. It's a heck of a horse. Estimated at $80,000 to $120,000. It belonged to the collection of Aurelius Parenti, and I don't know who that was. And it was sold last at Christie's in 1988. Again, almost 40 years ago. All right, and these pieces have been sort of out of favor for the last 30 years or something because of the problem with copies and fakes. So when you can get the chance to buy one that comes from an old collection that's documented, it's something worth considering. It's certainly worth considering. And then you have the next sale, and there's a lot of other things in that sale. There's some jades and things like that. I won't go through the whole thing, but there's some wonderful examples. And then over here, you have important Chinese art. And this is a pretty big sale. There's about 380 lots in the auction. There's a lot of ceramics, a lot of jades, Chinese furniture, and so forth. But there's a couple of components to the sale that I found pretty interesting. And one of them is this section here. These Daisai Gazai decorated bowls that were made in 1876 for the Empress Dowager Cixi and so forth. Many of you are familiar with it. You've certainly seen the copies of them floating around, these ink grisaille decorated pieces, and often on yellow ground, sometimes on aubergine, sometimes on turquoise, and sometimes on even rarer on white. But this one is in yellow, And I get people emailing us through the identification system service all the time with copies of these. And if you have an interest in these, bookmark this auction or save the images from this sale, because there's 50 pieces in here. And it's important to keep in mind that they estimate that only around 5,000 pieces in this pattern were ever made, between all the color backgrounds that were used, the yellows, the aubergines, and so forth. They were not produced in large numbers. Many of them were intended apparently to go to the Summer Palace when it was being rebuilt after it was sacked by the British and the French when they robbed the place and then burned it down. Um, it's a sore point, isn't it? Imagine what they destroyed, idiots. Um, is the one of the things you can always look at on these, the difference between the copies and the originals, is one of the things is the shading. The shading is so complete on the grisaille decoration of the originals. They shade it all in. It isn't just outlined and left white. They fill it in beautifully. And there are a number of pieces in here that you can go through and you can really study it. And the other thing is, of course, the ground color, the yellow. You'll notice it goes dark here over to lighter areas and darker and so forth. A lot of variation in the thickness of the ground enamels, especially in the yellow examples. And this is really beautiful pair of them, pair of wonderful fish bowls, and they're estimated at $20,000 to $30,000. They may do better than that because you don't see pairs of these very often, and they have let's see, what are these? They're 9 inches in diameter each. All right. And then there's another one here, which is a turquoise example. And this thing is a monster. This thing is 28 inches in diameter, and this is on the turquoise ground, that beautiful blue background. And you'll notice that the script up here has been sort of rubbed off of it, which was a problem with the originals. But the glaze is a very not a super glossy glaze. It's sort of a matte finish decoration, which allows the grisaille decoration to stand out a bit better and give it a bit of a three-dimensional look, like it's the sky in the background and you have the blackbird flying overhead and so forth. This one is estimated at $60,000 to $80,000, but remember, it is massive. And they believe that some of these big pieces were made for the Empress Dowager's residence at the or one of the buildings at the Yuan Ming Yuan that was going to be for her. And this is a great example. And then this is the more typical type that you see on the market in reproductions, especially. These are the most commonly reproduced type of the period. You see them a lot, and you want to be very, very careful that you're not, if you're looking at one and they're asking a lot of money for it, you want to make absolutely certain it's an authentic example, and you got to get a feeling for the weight of it. And again, that beautifully colored in grisaille ink work all over the piece. And so forth, because there are a lot of copies of this bowl floating around out there. It's estimated at $5,000 to $7,000 because this was the one form that they did make the most of, and when they continued to reproduce them into the 1920s, they kept using this form. All right, and this is something you don't see, and there's a couple of white pieces in here. In the white background, the color backgrounds had to do with the seasons. In the white background, examples, I believe, supposed to represent summer. Not summer, spring and fall, but summer. And you don't see them very often, and you don't see brush pots very often in this pattern. And this is a beautiful looking brush pot, absolutely beautiful, elegant, and very, very unusual. Here's a picture of the bottom with that nice big unglazed ring on the bottom where they fired it, and signatures on the bottom. There's more of the decoration. Estimated $8,000 to $12,000, but absolutely worth it. Now, moseying along over to this one, these are out of the collection of Ronald Langsdorff. Now, hold on a second. And many of you know who Robert Langsdorff is. If you've been collecting anything at the time, you know that he had written one of these landmark books on early Neolithic Chinese pottery. He had a significant collection of Tang wares and, Sung wares, rather, Sung celadons. And Jim Lally did an exhibition of the Langsdorff collection. He's a scholar. He did all kinds of things, but for a time he had a real interest in these Dai bowls, these Empress Dowager pieces, and he wrote a big article that was in Orientations magazine. And this is a really unusual pair of planters with a blue parrot on them, and the standard pattern, signatures and seals on a white background. Many of you probably have never seen one of these before. I've seen white planters, but I've never seen them with a blue parrot on it. I think this is absolutely amazingly beautiful, and they're estimated at $20,000 to $30,000, which doesn't seem unreasonable to me. We'll see if he gets there. All right. And then heading over to here is the silk section. If you're a silk buyer, there's some very, very good silk in this sale. Really early, some very early examples, some Ming pieces and so forth. A number of them came out of one particular collection. They pulled in some others. In this example, you're looking at an 18th century rondelle robe with a three-clawed dragon, a two-clawed dragon, excuse me, not three-clawed, two-clawed, which is very unusual. And these were ladies' robes, and this two-clawed dragon would have probably been used on a sort of a mid-range concubine, perhaps, or a close friend of the empress. Beautifully done, but the colors are absolutely beautiful on this. The color palette. You have this very, very pretty, extremely clean blue, this beautiful red background, this lovely sort of greenish yellow running down through here. Lots of very, very complementary colors all working together. And then sort of in many places here, like on the sleeves and around the collar, it's all punctuated by a black background with gilt and blues and yellows and golds and so forth. An absolutely wonderful piece. 18th century, probably late Qianlong period. Estimated at $30,000 to $50,000, but it's in great condition. So certainly a good deal. And then over here to this, and this is something many of you have seen because they made a lot of reproduction of these in the 1900s to the 1930s even. And this is a three-star god Kisi work panel from the 18th century. But look at the colors. Look at I couldn't get over how strong the colors were on this. So it's obviously been very carefully cared for. The reds are still strong, the yellows are strong, the greens aren't faded. There are no color fading in all of this at all. And these are the three star gods, and this is Shalu over here, the most famous, the one with the big bald head, the peach head. And he's reaching out with the peach. He's got his staff and so forth. And there's a very nice write-up on this, sort of explaining who the figures were, and Fu, Lu, and Shao. The three deities are worshipped and revered in Chinese culture, particularly during festivals and important occasions, with the hope of attracting luck, wealth, and longevity. And of course, Shao is the god of longevity. This one, because you can have all the luck in the world and all the money in the world, but you don't have a long life, that it doesn't do you much good. It's estimated at $60,000 to $80,000. All right. But this is not an early 20th century example, a revival piece. This is an 18th century example piece. And most of these were made in the Guangzhou area. They did a lot of really, really good silk work. And moseying along over here is a military officer's ceremonial armor. They date it to the late 18th, early 19th century, so late Qianlong to Jiajing period. And this is a really good example, and for a number of reasons. The first of which, of course, is the condition. It looks pristine. It looks absolutely fantastic. The gold work, the metal work on the shoulders and the sleeves are good. All the rebuses and rivets are still in place. You have this very dramatic looking dragon in the middle here, very Qing. And again, you see this wave pattern that you see at the bottoms of robes all the time. And then coming down here, you have a pair of ascending dragons coming up out of the sea. And these cloud patterns here that you often see on Ming silk, Ming decorations. They were still using them during the middle of the Qing dynasty on certain things. And then you have this sort of vibrant wave pattern again at the bottom. Very, very nice. Estimated at $30,000 to $50,000. Very, very rare and unusual. And hopping along to this is something you don't see every day. Ming rank badge. And we've talked a bit. We talked about the Ming ranked badge book that's out. And apparently, somebody commented in one of the videos that they're waiting for the thing to get reprinted. I guess it was a run on rank badge books, probably from here, I suspect, because they don't print that many, so it doesn't take too many purchases to put a dent in inventories. But anyway, this is a really interesting rank badge. It's imperial and it's a Ming badge. And if you look at it, you'll see the first thing is you'll see those cloud patterns. Here they are that we just saw on the Qing, our military garment. But you'll have this beautiful winged dragon here, sort of flying up with his tail under him, and the flaming pearl over here, and so forth. And then you have the wave pattern done with gold threads and so forth at the bottom. Really, really nice example, and on a silk damask, blue silk damask background. Beautiful example, and again, estimated at $20,000 to $30,000. And this came from the Zhengji Tang collection. And I don't know who he was, but whoever he was, it's a really good collection. He had the pieces, many of these pieces have been exhibited. I don't think it's his entire collection, but it's certainly a good part of some of the good pieces. And this was one of the pieces is in the collection. All right. If one of you knows who he is, let me know. Put it in the comments. And then there's this very, very rare Ming dragon robe, 17th century, probably Wan Li period. And the reason these are rare is that very often people that own them were buried in them. This would be one of the most treasured possessions. And this was a beautiful, beautiful example. And the ones that survived generally survived because they were sent to Tibet. And the Tibetans, one of the reasons they know this was probably from Tibet was the sleeves are nice and straight. They're not the billows, loose sleeves that you see often in the Ming court robes. When they sent them to Tibet as gifts, they would alter them to make the sleeves a little more tight fitting, a little more practical for where they lived, more to their taste. And these have survived, but not a lot of them. A few of them, and sometimes the ones that survive are just in tatters. They're just in the bottom of a box. They've been just falling apart. This one looks like it's in quite good condition. I don't know if it's had any work done to it or restoration done to it. You'll have to, if you're interested in this, you have to get a hold of Sotheby's and ask them. But it's an extremely rare example with a beautiful four-clawed dragon on it and perfectly rendered. And it is estimated at 100 to 150,000 US dollars. And then coming along over to this caught my eye because the condition was so good. This is a pair of Qing chair covers. Let's see here, late 17th century, so it'll be Kangxi period. They are 58 inches in length each, 15 inches wide. They were sold at Christie's 25 years ago. But they are absolutely unbelievable condition. The phoenix is at the top, and then the peonies in the middle, and then the dragons ascending up out of the waves at the bottom. And that's something you don't see very often on these panels. And again, those sort of Mingish clouds floating around in the foreground. It looks like there's some gold thread there. But notice the condition of these textiles. They're absolutely. This thing is that they look new. They're not new. These are antique, but the condition is phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal, which means they've been kept very carefully in a dark place and only taken out and never placed in anywhere near sunlight. But absolutely great. Estimated at $40,000 to $60,000 or $20,000 to $30,000 for each. But to get a pair of these and to be in such great condition each is a great opportunity. And then over to this. This is a Ming Dynasty robe that has not been cut. 17th century, again, vibrant background, great big dragon on it, almost cartoonish look. It looks like a theatrical thing, with foo dogs at the bottom and so forth, and these nice big billowing robe sleeves with the phoenix on each side, and get it down here, the dragon's tail coming over the top of the sleeve, and so forth. This is a very, very wonderful robe. It's rather festive looking, isn't it? And I like it a lot. And again, in terrific condition. The condition of this is absolutely great. And it's estimated at $40,000 to $60,000. And then I think we're getting on to the last of them maybe. There's two more. Is this another Ming brocade panel? Late Ming Dynasty, probably Wan Li. But in very, very good condition again with this great big exuberant dragon chasing the pearl and so forth. It looks like it might have had a repair or something up here in that area, but the ground color is good. The decorations are all intact. You have a pair of stags at the bottom running away with citron fingers of Buddha at the bottom and so forth. Very, very interesting. And it's estimated at $60 to $80,000. This is a pretty good sized panel as well. It measures 48 inches in height and 26 inches in width. So it would make a wall somewhere in somebody's house if you get it museum framed and put under museum glass and away from sunlight for the rest of its life. And then over here is this Jifu robe, Jiaqing period, first half of the 19th century, 1830s, somewhere around there, or excuse me, 1800 to 1795 to 1796 to 1820, rather, excuse me. You have this beautifully colored robe on a cafe ground, and this just gloriously exploding series of colors and waves and flowers bursting through down at the bottom, and these very, very attractive dragons placed neatly going up it. And this one with the flaming pearls on flanking each side of the opening, and then under the dragon. Nice sleeves. Everything looks good. Don't see a ton of wear or pulls or anything anywhere. The whole robe looks like it's in spectacular condition and has a very unusual cafe au lait, sort of cafe ground color to it. Let's see here. It was sold by E.J. Frankel in 1981. So, and E.J. Frankel's, I don't believe they're any longer. They're not alone. They're no longer in business. They were a good dealer in New York for a long time. They handled a lot of great material. It's estimated at $50,000 to $70,000. And I think this is the last piece of silk. Is this rank badge, military rank badge with a foo line in the middle of it. Very nicely done. Estimated at just $2,000 to $3,000, and it's a late 19th century example. Probably they're hedging. They called it 19th to 20th century, just in case it was made at the last years of the Qing dynasty, I suppose. And then on the ceramic front, there's some interesting ceramics. Is this stacking box from the Kangxi period? Very unusual, highly unusual, and it's got a pretty big estimate, $150,000 to $250,000. But this is not your typical Kangxi Marken period piece of porcelain. It was last sold apparently by Marchants in London. That's not a surprise, is it? And here it is. But what an amazing looking thing! And this is one of these great Chinese things from the early 18th century that looks almost like it's modern. It reminds me a little bit of Hirado ware almost. The way it's the softness of the blues, the decorations, but a lot of this work is very unlike Kangxi work. This is for Kangxi wares. There's these very fine, delicate little bands and so forth. Really interesting. Absolutely amazing. Estimate is big, 150 to 250,000. But go find another one. Do they mention if there's any others? Present color meticulous drawn to compare with a related polychrome. Okay, there's a color enameled one, archaistic patterns with quay dragons, diaper border, and so forth. Marken period sold in 1993, and that's it. So there's been one other that was enameled that was somewhat similar that they sold, but this one is absolutely fabulous. It's great, and it's worth it. If that's the case. And then this I just put this in just because I liked it a lot. I love the shape. I love the yellow color. It's a late Ming. It's a transitional period pot. I'm assuming they didn't really date it. They just said yellow 17th century jar. But it looks like it's probably either late Ming or Shunxi period, or somewhere in there, in that mysterious era. Here's the bottom of it. It's got some exhibition of art treasures in 1967. It was sold by Chait Galleries in New York at one point. It's got good pedigree, beautifully potted, beautiful color. It's a wine jar, very, very attractive. And it's estimated at $20,000 to $30,000. That's in the sale. And then this was a piece of Yongchen porcelain Meiping vase that was made in Tang Yin's supervision when they were doing when they first began doing sort of revival pieces of Ruware of the 12th century, the Sung dynasty. And here's a piece of it that was made. They believe this was probably produced by Tang Yin's workmen early and middle of the Yongchen period. A beautiful, beautiful pot. It is estimated at $100,000 to $150,000. It is marked on the bottom, and you see a lot of copies of these around. I would urge everybody, if you're interested in these wares, to come over and study the bottom of this, study the foot rim, study the glaze, the texture of the glaze, the way it sort of undulates, the orange peel, because these glazes were fairly thickly applied, so you get some waves in it, and that's what they should look like. And fortunately, the Sotheby's did a really good job lighting this, so you can see all the surface without any trouble. I wish that you could bring it in a little closer, but you can't. So, at any rate, I like that. I thought that was pretty great. And then over to this. I'm pointing this out. This is there's a section of the sale that there's a number of these yellow bowls with blackbirds and flowers on them, Tongxi marks on the bottom. This one was sold by Christie some time ago. But this week, I got a couple of inquiries from people that were looking at the copies of these that are available on Live Auctioneers. I think it's a sale in Europe that's handling them. And a couple of people sent me links saying, is this a real one? And I said, no, they're copies. And here is a classic example of one. And when you see these bowls, you'll be really, really careful. One, you have the same sort of variations in yellow that you're going to see on those Cixi Dowager pieces. But you also notice the way the birds are drawn. They're very angular, very controlled, very beautiful. They don't look like the copies. Often the birds are painted. They look like wet, soggy, sad sparrows or starlings that flew through a hurricane or something, and they don't look very great. Here you see that the artist has shaded the wings. The bird is sleek. They have great looking expressions on their faces, almost surprise or whatever. And you want to pay very close attention to that. And then the shaping of the bowl is perfect. And you'll notice natural areas of where the gilt band is around the bottom, around the rim, and so forth. All the things that you need to look at, but you want to be really, really careful because they reproduced copies of these in the 1920s, and they're reproducing copies of these by the boatload today. And there's I think in this sale there's 5 or 6 lots in this pattern from the Tongxi period, so it's worth looking at. This bowl is estimated at $8,000 to $12,000. It is 8.25 inches in diameter. This one, interesting, had belonged to Simon Kwan with the Yangji Tang collection. It was lot number 86. Which is Simon Kwan was one of the great mid 20th century collectors. And then over to this caught my eye because it's a very unusually decorated a piece of lacquerware from the Wan Li period, and it's dated to the year 1591, which makes it even more rare. But one of the things that's on here is that the decoration, you can't really see, you'd have to see it by picking it up, but it has layers of lacquer. And then in between, they put in gilt, or they would use gold or silver. So it has gold or silver inlay in the outline of the dragon, for example, on here, which was a fairly new technique in the lacquer world during the late Ming Dynasty. This was something they were sort of developing, and this is a very early dated example. So it's beautifully done. It's from the beginning of, again, the origin of this type of work around that time. And it's dated and signed to the period. So this makes it pretty rare bird, and it's in very good condition considering it's lacquer, and it's 500 or 600 years old, because lacquer, everybody knows, is notorious for cracking, chipping, falling apart, not being very happy. The estimate is strong. It's an $80,000 to $100,000 estimate, but it's historic, it's dated. It combines interesting techniques. There's a very good catalog note at the bottom, and with more references if you want to look it up. Certainly worth looking into. All right, and then over here to this. I'm throwing this in just because I thought the estimate was awfully low. And I think this was a beautiful piece of bronze, 17th to 18th century, so Ming to early Qing. And it's just one of these lost wax technique cast bronzes. But the quality of the casting, I just thought, wow, look at the way the waves are done, the head, the animal, the beautifully curved in sort of top, and then the reticulated upper section with clouds and dragons swirling around. And it looked like it was in great condition. It's about 5 inches in diameter, and it's estimated just $6,000 to $8,000. And if you can buy that for under 15,000, I think you got a great buy in your hands. That's a wonderful looking bronze. Really is. The patina looks fantastic. And then over to this, something you don't see very often, are a pair of gilt bronze Champlavet Chinlung mark and period bowls. And you don't see these very often. And these are pretty fussy looking, and I like them. And I'm not a big fan of terribly fussy things, but I think these are elegant. And Champlavet instead of cloisonné. And there is a difference. And you don't often think of, the Chinese did Champlavet, but the Japanese did a lot more of it. And here you have them on a pair of sort of gold planters. They theorized in the write-up that these might have been meant to put one of those jade plants in, a real jade plant. Not the tourist ones they made in 1915 and 1930, but real jade plants would be put into to a pair of these, and you'd put them in a great hall somewhere. But these are absolutely beautifully done, meticulous workmanship on them all the way around, and they have these sort of undulating rims. Those aren't bad. That's the way they were made. And here is the bottom with the seal mark, Chinlung seal marks on them, and just great. And again, the kind of thing, how often do you see these? Champlavet from the Chinlung period that are mark and period. They're estimated, I think, very reasonably, $20,000 to $30,000. I think that's and it may just be because they don't have a lot of comps to go by. I don't know. Do the notes mention related examples sold in June of 1980, lot number 9, and a similar one sold at Christie's in Hong Kong in 2013. Here it is. Identically cast Chinlung 6-character marks with double square can be found on cloisonné wares of the period. Okay, right. But not on Champlavet. So that's I was wondering what the hell are they talking about. Anyway, that makes these pretty interesting, I think. And then over to this. This is one of the dandiest little pieces in the entire sale. It's only estimated $8,000 to $12,000. Is a Kangxi period a spotted deer vase. Kangxi, nice flat round foot. Marchand had sold it some years ago, and but look at the workmanship. Look at the quality of that underglazed red with the blue in the middle of it. This is sort of like showing off because we've talked about many times. Underglazed blue and underglazed red fire and bloom to their best color at different temperatures. So how on earth do they do this? From a technical standpoint, this was incredibly hard to do, to get the red to bloom properly and no green showing, no faults, and the blue to show up properly with those little tiny white spots in the middle of the spotted deer. These absolutely knocked me out, and I'm at a bit of a loss to understand the estimate, only $8,000 to $12,000. I think these are absolutely great, and this little deer on here is very three-dimensional looking. He looks like he's moving. There's a butterfly up here on the shoulder. That's a great little porcelain. No, it's not marked, but who cares? You know what it is. You know it's Kangxi. It absolutely is. It's 8.5 inches tall. It's got a fairly long write-up. Different collections it's been through over the years. Alfred Schoenlicht acquired it by 1929. Then it sold in London at Sotheby's in 1955. Then it went to Blewett and Sons. And then it went to Wilfrid Ariel Evel, died in 1963. In 1965, it was back at Sotheby's. And then it was back at Blewett's again. They bought it back. And then Neustadt Oud Kunst at The Hague. And then Marchand in London owned it. So it's got a pretty good track record of great owners. But I think this is just a nifty Meiping vase, one of the nicest. And as I said, you don't see them very often with the underglazed red and the underglazed blue being combined to do the decorations and working out so perfectly. And that very, very nice sort of a slightly bluish white body, and $8,000 to $12,000 to try and buy it. I don't think it'll go for that. I would hope that would go for more than that, just because it's got an amazing sort of coolness factor to it. And you don't have to be a Chinese porcelain expert to recognize that's just a great piece of art. All right, and then the last thing I want to talk about is this little Guangxu period. It's mark and period bowl, and it came from the George Weishaupt collection, and Sotheby sold it last in 1995. Here's the bottom of it, and I only point this out because this is just an elegant, wonderful little bowl. and it's got a very modest estimate, $4,000 to $6,000. And the color green on this is just this beautiful apple green, very nicely done, beautifully potted, nice looking foot rim on it, and isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg if you want to try and buy it if you get it. So there you go. All right. And that's about it. It's all of them are pretty good looking sales. Christie's has got some good things. Sotheby's got some good things. And we're gonna, if we have time, we'll take a look at bottoms the next couple of days. But I think that sort of covers it. If you still have time to get a hold of Sotheby's, if something you want to see, go ahead and do it. If you enjoyed the video, leave a comment, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you all tomorrow with the regular weekly. All right. Bye-bye.